Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, trashy horror, I'm going to talk about the Omen series of novels. So this is part of my ongoing countdown to GarbAugust series, where each week I'm reviewing a trashy book. This week there's actually 5 of them, so I read all 5 books in the Omen series, and it was a lot of fun. So I actually read them back to back, so I read them like they were a single book, which was probably not how they're intended to be read, but it was quite entertaining. So you're probably familiar with the Omen film series. So the first book came out just before the movie. So the movie was released in '76 with a big marketing budget behind it. So it was a big mainstream studio release. The book, as I say, was published 2 weeks before the film came out, and apparently sold 3.5 million copies. So obviously, was boosted by the popularity of the film. When I used to read novelisations of movies, it was typically when I couldn't get to see the movie myself for whatever reason. So I don't know if that's the case with The Omen or not. But yeah, certainly was a very, very popular book at the time, and in fact nearly made the bestseller list for 1976 apparently. What's interesting about it is that it was written by the same person who wrote the screenplay. So David Seltzer wrote the screenplay for The Omen, came up with the story and everything, and also wrote the novelisation, which I think is fairly unusual. I'm trying to think if I can think of any other examples of that. I'm sure there are some, and I'm sure It Came From The Page, who is a huge fan of novelisations, will be able to point me in the direction of some. But yeah, typically novelisations are written by, kind of jobbing writers who get hired by publishers because they've got the rights to publish the novelisation for a film. Novelisations, used to be huge. So it used to be that any major film that came out would have a novelisation attached to it. Particularly in like the kind of 70s and 80s. I think nowadays it's much less common. You do still see them, but it's less common. What you see, it seems to me, more often nowadays is movies that are like spin-offs from film series. So for example, there are tons of Aliens novels that you can read. So I think when a publisher is aware that there's a particular franchise that's really popular, they will milk that franchise and publish many books that are inspired by it. And the Alien series is great, and It Came From The Page, who I just mentioned, is a really big fan of the Aliens books, and I've read one of the Aliens books that wasn't a direct novelisation of a screenplay, and I have to say that was pretty good. That was Aliens Phalanx. But yeah, It Came From The Page absolutely loves that series and talks about them glowingly. So the Omen series of books then is interesting in that the first 3 are novelisations of the movies, albeit this one, as I said, was actually written by the same person who wrote the screenplay. This one for Damien, Omen 2, was written by Joseph Howard, and this one for The Omen, The Final Conflict, was written by Gordon McGill. Now obviously at that point the film series stopped, so The Omen, The Final Conflict is the last of the Omen films that was released in the cinemas. There is a later Omen 4 movie, which was like I think a Canadian TV movie, which isn't supposed to be terribly good. But the publishers, after the 3 cinema films had completed, the publishers did decide to keep on milking the Omen cow, or maybe flogging the Omen dead horse, and published a couple more books, both by David McGill, who'd written the novelisation for the 3rd one. So we had Omen 4, Armageddon 2000, and Omen 5, The Abomination. So these came out in... So the 3 Omen films came out in... Let me check my notes. So The Omen came out in 76, as I've said. Omen 2 came out in 78. And Omen 3 came out in 1980, and then the novelisation the continuation of the story in Omen 4 came out in 83, and then this one came out in 85. So they kept on the same sort of rhythm, if you like, of releasing the book. So every couple of years or so, another book came out for two more books anyway. So in terms of what they're like, actually, one thing to say about the Omen first. So as I've said, this sold very, very well when it came out, and it was really good. So I think the fact that it was written by the same person who wrote the screenplay was definitely of benefit to it. So you see him digging into the kind of thoughts of the characters in a way that you don't often see in novelisations. So novelisations tend to be written, tend to be written from the screenplay rather than from the finished film, because there's a there's a need in terms of like the timeline of publishing to get the final version of the book ready, so that when the final version of the film is ready, both can be released at the same time. But obviously Seltzer had an insight into the mind of the screenwriter, because he was the screenwriter, and so I think injects a bit more extra into this than you often get in novelisations. Also, I would say the prose in this is actually pretty good. So novelisations quite often have a fairly kind of stripped down, fairly bland style of prose, because they are, it's someone else, it's the author telling someone else's story. But it feels like David Seltzer was a bit more invested in this and gives a bit more of himself in the prose. So there's a bit of playfulness at some points in the prose, which I enjoyed. And he also does a good job with the gore scenes. So obviously, one of the points of the Omen films, really. So whilst they were hugely popular and big, mainstream horror movies, as with many horror movies of the time, the point really was about showing explicit gore on screen. So you get, the famous beheading with a sheet of glass towards the end. In Omen 2, you get the great crows pecking out the woman's eyes scene, and the elevator death. And David Seltzer in this does a pretty good job of describing those scenes without going over the top. So you know what's happened and you're kind of slightly taken aback by it, but he doesn't dwell on it. So it works really well. What's fascinating to me anyway about this is that there's a publisher called Suntup Press who publish like luxury editions of books, basically, and they are publishing in the winter of 2022 a series of posh editions of the Omen. So bear in mind, I paid like £1.50 for this, I think, and you can easily buy it secondhand. I'm not sure if it's still in print or not, to be honest with you, from Futura or whoever owns the rights now. But anyway, Suntup Press are doing these luxury editions. The cheapest edition they are doing, let me just double check. The cheapest edition they are doing is $155. The most expensive edition they are doing, which is the lettered edition, where there are only 26 copies, one for each letter of the alphabet, is just under $2,000. Now they do look like lovely books, and they're lovely hardcovers with illustrations and things like that. But yeah, $2,000 for a novelisation. You've got to really love the Omen and really love novelisations to buy that. I'm guessing that at least one of those 26 $2,000 editions is going to David Seltzer. So I'm guessing he's bought one of those, or maybe they're giving him one for free. But yeah, that does seem a lot to pay. But I thought it was wonderful. I love the fact that exists, that a $2,000 version of this book exists. So anyway, yeah, these are a fun read, and I enjoyed reading them as one story. So the basic plot, if you don't know it, and you probably do, and slight spoilers here if you haven't seen the movies or read the book, so apologies. So the basic plot is, in the Omen, there's this guy who's like an American diplomat who's living in London. He and his wife have been trying to have a kid for ages and failed. They finally managed to have one, but at the last minute, and they have him in Rome, I think it is. At the last minute, the baby gets snatched and replaced with this other baby. And the other baby has been deliberately cultivated, shall we say, by these occultists, these devil worshippers, and is born of a union between the devil and a jackal, but looks like a human child because I don't know, because it would. So they substitute the baby. The dad knows this, but like covers it up because he doesn't want his wife to go through the trauma of losing a child again. And they raise him as their own son. who is called Damien, and it gradually becomes apparent that there is, you know, a lot more to Damien than meets the eye, and various people die in various grisly ways as the book progresses, and it climaxes with the dad trying to, you know, realising he needs to rid the world of his son, or his adopted son, and trying to kill Damien. In the sequel, so in Omen 2, Damien is now in kind of going through puberty, so he's kind of 12, 13, and he's been sent to this military school, and, you know, similar plot. So, you know, people realise that he needs to be taken out, and, you know, various deaths happen as the story progresses. What's interesting in this one is you see a lot more of Damien's, you know, Damien's own thoughts. So Damien, whereas in this book he's not an incidental character clearly, but you don't really. You hear about what he's done and you see what he's doing rather than hearing his inner thoughts. This one, there's quite a lot about Damien trying to come to terms with the weird feelings he's having. And it's quite a nice kind of coming of age story in that respect, albeit with a bit of a demonic twist. But yeah, a very entertaining read. And again, the scenes of violence are very well handled. In the final conflict, Damien is grown up. And is a politician and trying to become the presidential candidate. So again, there's various grisly deaths, and people conspire to take him out. And at the end of this book and the movie, they do manage to kill him. So sorry for the spoilers there. I will put a spoilers flag on the thumbnail for this video. So they do manage to take him out. Obviously, the publishers weren't prepared for the series to end. I'm guessing that the filmmakers, you know, had conceived of this as a you know, a short series of movies with a logical ending. So they give it that. In this book, it turns out, so this is set. I'm not sure if it is like 14, 15 years later, because I'm not exactly sure when the final conflict is meant to be set. I think it's set in like kind of the late 80s, and this is set, as the title suggests, in 2000. So the world in 2000 has moved on. Clearly, the fact that they managed to kill Damien at the end of book 3 hasn't helped that much, and there's like a terrible conflict in the Middle East, and there's been like nuclear war there and things like that. It turns out that Damien in book 3 had sex with a human woman and got her pregnant, and she has now had a child who is growing up. So this is almost like a retread of the first book, in that it's about this child with demonic abilities growing up and people trying to get rid of him, and you know, various things happening. So people who are on the side of the devil, you know, trying to stop the people who are trying to kill the new Damien. So that was quite, again entertaining. I mean, all these books are very silly, and, you know, really play into that kind of 70s, 80s obsession with devil worship and things like that. So I'm not really sure where that came from. I'm not sure if it came from, you know, kind of the religious right and the mega churches and the growth of televangelism and things like that in the States. But there was definitely a lot of interest in devil worship and things like that in the 70s and 80s. And I think the run up to the year 2000 and this concept of, you know, 2000 kind of being a judgment day definitely plays into that as well. So anyway, in the 5th book, you know, that devil child is still alive but is a bit older. The problems in the Middle East continue. Damien is kind of growing up and he's going to inherit the Thorn Empire. So what I forgot to say is that there's this kind of huge company that's involved in all sorts of different scientific pursuits, which runs through all of the series, which was set up by or run by the original dad in the first book. So, you know, same sort of plot in this one. So it's people trying to get rid of the new Damien, and he's trying to get rid of them, and the people conspiring with him and trying to get rid of him. But again, it's just silly, entertaining devil worship with, you know, a decent kill every 50 pages or so, basically. But yeah, I really enjoyed it as a bit of trashy fun where you know exactly what you're going to get going into a book like this. And I think, you know, particularly with the novelisation, you definitely know exactly what you're going to get because you know the movie, so you know what the book's going to be about. But these two books do a very good job of continuing the kind of the mood of the Omen series, continuing to be silly, continuing to be a tiny bit chilling in places, but not really. But yeah, just a very, very entertaining read. And reading the whole series back to back, which I did in the course of about 3 days. You know, these are not by any means, you know, they're not long books. They're all about 200 pages, but they're just not at all taxing. You can read them very quickly. So yeah, it was a very entertaining experience reading them as 1,000-page trashy horror novel. So I do recommend it, particularly if you're a fan of the Omen films. But even if you're not, if you fancy a light, silly horror read, you could do a lot worse than these books. So yeah, let me know if you're an Omen fan and if you've read any or all of these books. As always, let me know what you are going to be reading for GarbAugust if you've got your books picked out yet. I'm going to be doing more GarbAugust stuff, so I'll continue doing this Road to GarbAugust or Countdown to GarbAugust video every week, but also in July I'm going to be doing some giveaways and a GarbAugust tag as well, so look out for those. But yeah, in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're really good stuff. Hope you're safe and well, and I will speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.